Please save my sister. That voice, small, shaking, desperate, cut through the sound of roaring engines like a cry from another world. It came from a black boy no older than 10, barefoot, standing in the rain at the edge of a gas station where a group of Hell's Angels had stopped for coffee and warmth. His clothes were soaked, his knees scraped, and in his hands he held a torn, stuffed rabbit. At first they thought they hadn't heard him right. Rain poured off the metal roof. Lightning flashed behind the dark clouds. The world went still. Then he said it again, louder this time. Please save my sister. The laughter died instantly. Cups froze midair. Every man there turned, eyes narrowing toward the boy standing in the puddles under the flickering light. Red, the leader, set his cup down slowly and stepped forward. He looked rough. Gray beard, scars, heavy boots, but his eyes softened when he saw the boy. "What's your name, son?" he asked. "Jamal," the boy whispered, his voice trembling. "Where's your sister, Jamal?" The boy pointed toward the woods beyond the gas station, where a dirt road disappeared into darkness. His lip quivered. "She's in the house. He's hurting her again." The word he came out like poison. Red's jaw tightened. "Who's hurting her? My stepdad. Jamal said he's drunk again. I tried to call the police, but they never come." For a moment, nobody spoke. Rain hit the ground harder. The air grew heavy like the whole night was holding its breath. Finally, Red turned to his men. "Mount up!" The engines came alive, deep and low, shaking the ground beneath them. 6 bikes lined up under the storm, headlights cutting through the rain like fire through smoke. Red lifted the boy onto the back of his Harley. "Hold on tight, kid. We'll find her." Jamal wrapped his arms around Red's waist, clutching the back of his jacket. The stuffed rabbit dangled from one hand, soaked but still there. They rode out into the storm. Thunder above and thunder below. The sound echoed across the empty fields of Mississippi. To anyone watching, it would have looked like chaos. Leather, lightning, and engines. But to Jamal, it sounded like hope. As they rode, Red spoke over his shoulder. "How old's your sister?" 14, Jamal said softly. "Her name's Aisha." He hesitated, then added, "She's the one who takes care of me. When Mom left, she made me breakfast every day. She said, if anything ever happened, I should run." Red's grip on the handlebars tightened. The road blurred beneath them, but his mind went somewhere else. Back to when he was a kid, and nobody had come for him. "You did the right thing, Jamal," he said. Behind them, Bear, Tank, and Doc followed close. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. Every man there had known darkness. And tonight they weren't riding from it. They were riding straight into it. The dirt road turned narrow and rough. The rain made it slick, the trees bending under the wind. Up ahead, through the fog, they saw it. A pale house sitting crooked at the edge of the woods. One weak light flickering in the window. It looked like a place where bad things stayed quiet. Jamal pointed. "That's it." Red slowed the bike. "You sure?" Jamal nodded, clutching the rabbit tighter. "He keeps the door locked. She screams, but nobody comes." Red turned to his crew. "All right, we don't start fights tonight. We end one." They parked their bikes off the road, engines still rumbling like thunder trapped in their chests. Tank muttered, "Red, we can't just walk in there." Red looked at him. If we wait, she might not see another morning. That was all it took. The boy followed them to the porch, his small feet sinking into the mud. The house smelled of mold and liquor even from outside. "Stay behind me, Jamal," Red said gently. He nodded, trembling. They knocked once. No answer. Knocked again. Still nothing. Then came the sound. A crash inside. A man's voice shouted something cruel. Red's voice dropped low. "That's it!" Bear stepped up and kicked the door open. It slammed against the wall with a loud crack. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of alcohol and sweat. Bottles on the floor, ashtrays overflowing, the kind of silence that tells you violence lives here. From the hallway came another sound, a muffled sob. And then the man appeared, big, red-faced, stumbling, his shirt unbuttoned, eyes mean and glossy with whiskey. "What the hell? Who are you people?" he slurred. Red didn't flinch. "We're the ones who answered when your boy called for help." The man squinted, then laughed, bitter and cruel. "That little brat, he's not my son." "Maybe not by blood," Red said quietly. "But he's still a child. And that girl down the hall, she's still someone's daughter." The man's face twisted. "Get out of my house." He lunged forward, swinging wildly. Tank moved before Red could, grabbing the man's arm mid-air and forcing him down. He didn't hit him. He just held him there, steady and unshakable. "You done yelling?" Tank said. Jamal ran past them, yelling, "Aisha!" They followed his voice down the hall. The last door was locked from the outside. Red kicked it open. There she was, a girl sitting on the floor, knees to her chest, face bruised, hair tangled. Her eyes went wide when she saw her brother. "Jamal," she whispered. He ran to her, wrapping his arms around her. "I told you I'd find help." She clung to him, sobbing into his shoulder. Red knelt beside them, pulled off his jacket, and wrapped it around her. "You're safe now." She looked up, confused. "Who are you?" He gave a small smile. "Just people who couldn't ride past a cry for help." Doc grabbed the phone on the counter and called the sheriff's office. "This is urgent," he said, voice steady. "You get a unit to Oak Ridge Road right now. There are 2 kids in danger and a man you'll want in cuffs." The man still struggled on the floor, cursing through his teeth. Bear stood over him, arms crossed, rainwater dripping from his jacket. Minutes later they heard sirens. The sound cut through the storm, growing louder until red and blue lights flashed across the wet walls. Jamal held Aisha's hand tightly. The stuffed rabbit lay between them on the couch. When the deputy stepped inside, the scene spoke for itself. The broken door, the bruises, the bikers standing silent in a circle of calm. The sheriff, an older man with tired eyes, stopped just inside the doorway. "What's going on here?" Red's voice was steady. "A boy ran to us for help. We brought it." The sheriff looked around the room at the girl wrapped in Red's jacket, at the man pinned to the floor, and then at the 6 men covered in rain and mud. He didn't ask any more questions. He just nodded. "Cuff him." When they led the man out into the rain, Aisha turned her face into her brother's shoulder and cried softly. Red stood by the doorway, silent. He wasn't the type for speeches. He'd seen too many nights like this. Too many broken homes, too many kids left to fight alone. Jamal looked up at him, eyes wide and tired. "Will they take us somewhere safe now?" Red crouched down to meet his eyes. "Yeah, kid, they will. And if they don't, we'll make sure they do." Jamal nodded slowly. For the first time that night, he looked less afraid. As the deputies drove away with the man in cuffs, the storm began to fade. The wind softened. The rain turned to mist. Bear lit a cigarette, shaking his head. "You think the world will ever stop making monsters like that?" Red looked out into the darkness. "No, but maybe it'll start making more kids like him." They watched the taillights disappear down the road. The house stood quiet now, broken, but no longer dangerous. Aisha sat on the couch beside her brother, Red's jacket still around her shoulders. The rabbit was clean now, sitting between them like a small symbol of survival. Jamal looked up. Thank you. Red gave a faint smile. Don't thank us, kid. You're the one who ran into the rain. That's courage. He turned back to his men. Let's go. The engines roared again, echoing through the valley like thunder rolling away, and as they disappeared down that muddy road, the world behind them didn't look so dark anymore. But the road ahead still did. The rain had slowed to a thin mist as 6 bikes rolled through the early morning fog. Their headlights stretched across puddles that shimmered like glass. The storm was gone, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than thunder. Red kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the handlebars. Jamal's small voice still echoed in his head. The police never come. That sentence stayed with him. Bitter and true. They'd done their part. The kids were safe. The man was gone. It should have felt over, but it didn't. Not for Red. He'd seen too many nights like that, where justice showed up late and left early. At the same gas station where it all began, the crew pulled back under the metal roof. The lights buzzed. Rainwater dripped from their jackets, forming small pools at their boots. Nobody spoke. Tank leaned against the pump. You think they'll be okay? Red looked out toward the empty road. They should be, he said quietly. But should doesn't mean much these days. Doc rubbed his hands together near the old heater. You know the news will twist this, right? Bikers break into home, that kind of thing. Red shrugged. Let 'em. We didn't do it for the news. Bear scoffed. You really think anyone will believe a bunch of leathered-up outlaws saved 2 kids in the rain? Red met his eyes. Doesn't matter who believes it. It matters those kids can sleep tonight. The group fell silent again. The rain hit the roof soft and steady like a heartbeat that wouldn't quit. A few miles away in the small-town sheriff's office, Jamal and Aisha sat together on a wooden bench. They were wrapped in blankets, faces pale but calm now. A kind deputy handed them paper cups of cocoa. You're safe here, she said. Aisha nodded but didn't drink. She didn't trust silence. It had never meant peace before. Jamal leaned against her, still holding his stuffed rabbit. They'll keep us together, right? She hesitated. I hope so. The sheriff, gray-haired and weary, stood at his desk reading the report. He'd seen the stepfather's name before, filed complaints, dismissed cases, closed with no follow-up. He exhaled slowly, guilt heavy in his chest. Find their aunt, he told his deputy. Tell her she's got 2 kids who need her tonight. Back at the gas station, Red sat on the curb, staring into a puddle that mirrored the buzzing light above. World's a strange place, he muttered. A millionaire can scream at a waitress and get applause. A kid screams for help and no one moves. Doc glanced over. You talking about that diner story again? Red nodded. Yeah, that rich jerk yelled at the poor girl behind the counter like she was dirt. Then he cried on TV and folks called him brave. Bear grumbled. Money buys everything these days, even forgiveness. Red shook his head. Not courage. That boy had more courage than half the people sitting in church pews. Tank sat beside him. We've done a lot of dumb things, Red, but tonight that felt right. Red nodded slowly. It was. The sky began to lighten. Birds chirped softly in the distance. The world was already moving on, as if the storm hadn't happened. Jamal and Aisha would wake up safe, but Red couldn't shake the weight in his chest. It all felt too unfinished. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a bracelet. Pink, cheap, made of beads. Aisha's, probably. He turned it over in his fingers. That girl's been fighting her whole life, he said quietly, and tonight was the first time someone fought beside her. Doc looked over. You going to check on them again? Red shrugged. Someone should. By sunrise, the gas station owner stepped outside, surprised to see them still there. He gave a slow nod. "Morning, boys. Long night." Red smiled faintly. "You could say that." The man pointed toward a corkboard by the door. "See that?" A faded missing poster hung there. 2 kids, a boy and a girl, Jamal and Aisha. Red walked over, staring at it. The paper was wrinkled from time, the date nearly a year old. He turned back. "You kept this up?" The man nodded. "Couldn't bring myself to take it down." Red's jaw tightened. "Good thing you didn't." He left a few bills on the counter for coffee. "Keep the change." The crew rolled out again, engines echoing down the empty stretch of road. No one said much. Every man had his own thoughts about the kids, the world, and how easy it is for good people to vanish in it. As they crossed a bridge, Red slowed his bike, staring out across the river. "You know," he said over the wind, "you can have all the money, all the cars, all the power, but none of it'll make you half as brave as that little boy tonight." Tank nodded. "That kid ran barefoot into the dark." "That's hard." Red smiled faintly. "Yeah, reminds me why we ride." Bear chuckled. "Thought we rode to get away from the world." "Sometimes," Red said, "we ride straight toward it." That morning, in a quiet kitchen miles away, Aisha and Jamal sat with their aunt. She was in her 50s, kind eyes, tired hands. The house smelled like pancakes. Aisha looked around carefully, still not believing she was safe. "Is it really over?" she asked. Her aunt squeezed her hand. "It's over, sweetheart." Jamal placed his rabbit on the table. "The bikers helped us," he said proudly. His aunt smiled through tears. "Well, angels come in all shapes, baby," he grinned. "These ones had motorcycles." She laughed softly. For the first time in years, the house felt warm. On the road again, Red pulled over by a stretch of open fields. The others stopped beside him. Doc frowned. "Something wrong?" Red shook his head. "No, just needed to remember what peace sounds like." He stood beside his bike, wind brushing against his jacket. "People think we ride to escape," he said quietly. "But sometimes we're the only ones running towards something good." Tank crossed his arms. "Like what?" Red smiled faintly. "Like the kind of world those kids deserve." The sun climbed higher, turning the wet ground gold. The storm was gone, but its memory lingered in the air. And as they kicked up the engines and thundered down the road, the world behind them looked softer, gentler, because one scared boy believed strangers might care. And he was right. That one act of faith, the kind that only comes from a pure heart, had changed everything. For days, the story spread quietly through town. No one had the full truth, only whispers. Some bikers saved 2 kids from a drunk. Others said the police had ignored calls, that the man had friends in the department, that this wasn't the first time someone had cried for help from that house. But no one knew what really happened that night on Oak Ridge Road, except the boy, his sister, and the men who answered the call. A few days later, Red sat alone at a diner just off Highway 12. The storm was gone, replaced by dry wind and bright morning light. The place smelled of bacon and burnt coffee, and the waitress behind the counter looked like she'd worked every shift since forever. When she walked over, she smiled politely. "You're with that group that helped those kids, aren't you?" Red looked up from his mug, surprised. "Word travels fast." She nodded. "In small towns, it always does." Her name tag said, "Linda." She poured him another cup of coffee. "You did something good, you know." He gave a half smile. "Did what anyone decent should have done." "Maybe," she said softly. "But not everyone does." She hesitated before adding, "That man, the one they arrested. He used to come in here. Always wore a gold watch. Always talked about how much money he made. Acted like he owned the place. Red frowned. Money and decency don't usually ride in the same truck. Linda nodded. You're right. He once made a waitress cry for bringing him the wrong coffee. Called her stupid in front of everyone. Same girl quit that night. I never forgot it. Red sat down his cup. And the cops never saw what kind of man he really was. No, she said they never do till it's too late. Outside, the sound of engines broke the quiet. The rest of the crew had arrived. Tank, Bear, Doc, Twitch, and Sonny. They filled the diner like thunder rolling in from nowhere. Tank slid into the booth across from Red. You look like a man who hasn't slept since Tuesday. Red smirked. Sleeps for people with fewer ghosts. The waitress came by, refilled their mugs, and whispered, Those kids are safe now, that's what matters. Red nodded, eyes distant. Yeah, but the world keeps spinning, and there's always another door locked from the outside. A few towns away, Aisha sat on her aunt's porch, knees pulled to her chest, watching the wind move through the trees. Her arm was still bruised, but she didn't hide it anymore. Jamal played in the yard, chasing a stray dog with his stuffed rabbit tied around his wrist. He laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. Her aunt came out with a glass of lemonade and set it beside her. He's starting to sound like a kid again, she said softly. Aisha smiled faintly. He's the brave one. Her aunt sat down beside her. You both are. That night, it could have gone differently. Aisha stared out toward the road. I didn't think anyone would come. They did, her aunt said, squeezing her hand. And they'll keep showing up. Maybe not the same people, but good people always do. Aisha nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed it yet. Back at the diner, Doc unfolded a newspaper someone had left on the counter. The headline was bold and simple. Local outlaws rescue children from abusive home. Below it, a blurry photo of the crew standing near their bikes. Rain pouring down around them. Outlaws. Bear read aloud with a chuckle. Guess we're famous now? Red shook his head. We didn't rescue anyone. That boy did. We just followed. Tank leaned back. You ever think about that? What makes a kid like him run straight toward strangers? Red stirred his coffee. Hope, he said, even when it doesn't make sense. Doc looked up. You think he learned that from his mom? Red's jaw tightened. He said she left. Bear frowned. You think she just walked out? Red sighed. Sometimes people don't leave because they stop loving. They leave because they can't survive staying. Nobody argued. Later that afternoon, the crew stopped by the sheriff's office. Red had been quiet the whole ride. When they pulled up, the sheriff stepped out to meet them, hat low, expression cautious. Didn't expect to see you boys again, he said. Red handed him the pink bracelet he'd found on the couch. Belongs to the girl. The sheriff nodded, pocketing it carefully. She's safe with her aunt. Social services is setting things up. Red looked him dead in the eye. Make sure they don't get lost in the system. The sheriff sighed. I know what folks say about me. I'm not proud of how long it took to listen, but I'm listening now, Doc muttered. Took a storm and 6 bikes to make the law remember its job. The sheriff gave a small nod. Sometimes it takes noise to wake up a sleeping town. That night, back at their clubhouse, the men sat around the fire pit behind the old garage. It wasn't much, just cracked chairs, a barrel fire, and the sound of crickets. Red leaned back, staring into the flames. You ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't stopped for gas that night? Tank threw a twig into the fire. Can't think like that. We were meant to be there. Sonny, the youngest, spoke up quietly. That boy, he reminded me of me. My old man used to drink like that too. The others looked at him. He rarely spoke about his past. I used to hide under the kitchen table, Sonny continued, "and wish anyone would come knock on our door." Red's eyes softened. "Guess that's why you didn't hesitate." Sonny nodded. "Nobody came for me. I couldn't let that happen to another kid." Bear reached over and patted his shoulder. "You did good, son." Hours passed. The fire burned low. The night turned quiet again. Doc finally broke the silence. "You think those kids will remember us?" Red smiled faintly. "Every time they see a bike, they'll know someone once cared," Tank added. "And every time we ride, we'll remember them." For a long moment, none of them spoke. The flames flickered, lighting up their faces like ghosts from another life. Red stared into the fire and said softly, "That house wasn't just broken. It was forgotten. People passed by it every day, heard the yelling, saw the bruises, and did nothing. The world's full of those houses." Bear grunted. "Yeah, but not every house gets a knock from us." Red looked up, a small smile tugging at his mouth. "Maybe that's about to change." The next morning, Aisha sat on her bed, sketching quietly in a notebook. On the page, 6 motorcycles lined up under a rainbow. At the top, she wrote in careful letters, "My angels on wheels." When Jamal saw it, he grinned. "Can I show them someday?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, someday." He smiled and ran outside to play, his laughter echoing across the yard. Their aunt watched from the doorway, tears in her eyes. For the first time, she saw something that had been missing for a long time. Hope. At that same hour, Red stood beside his bike, hands in his pockets, looking out at the sunrise. The light glowed off the chrome, warm and golden. He thought about Jamal's courage, about Aisha's quiet strength, and about all the people who look away because it's easier. Tank walked up beside him. "You ready?" Red nodded. "Yeah." They mounted their bikes. The engines came alive, loud, steady, and defiant. As they pulled onto the open road, Red's thoughts drifted back to the night it all began. One scared boy in the rain, whispering words that changed everything. "Please save my sister." He'd never forget them. And from that night on, every time they rode, every time they passed a quiet house or a lonely road, they listened just in case another voice ever called out through the storm. Because now they knew. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the loudest truth. And that truth doesn't fade easily. It echoes, especially in the hearts of those who heard it. Days passed, but Red couldn't shake that voice from his head. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Jamal standing in the rain, holding that worn-out, stuffed rabbit. He saw Aisha's tired, frightened face. Some nights, thunder rolled in the distance, and for a moment he thought it was engines. But it wasn't. Just the memory of what they had done, and what still lingered unfinished. Because deep down, Red knew this story wasn't over. It was Thursday evening when the phone rang. Tank was cleaning his Harley when Red picked up. It was Doc. "Turn on Channel 4, Doc said. Red grabbed the remote, clicked the old TV, and froze. The man they'd seen hauled off in cuffs. Raymond Cole was back on the screen, grinning like he'd won something. "Local businessman Raymond Cole was released on bail earlier today," the reporter said. The sheriff's office declined comment. Tank slammed his wrench down. "You've got to be kidding me." Red didn't move. His jaw tightened. "He's out," Doc said. Red's voice came out low. "And the kids." "Still with their aunt," Doc said. "For now." Red took a long breath. "Then we make sure it stays that way." By nightfall, the crew gathered at their old barn clubhouse. The place smelled like oil, dust, and rain-soaked leather. A single bulb hung overhead, swinging with the wind. Red spread a newspaper across the table. The headline glared up. "Local man released. Vows to rebuild his family." Bear shook his head. Family? That man doesn't know the meaning of it. Tank crossed his arms. You think he'll go after those kids? Doc nodded. He's already said he wants them back. Red's voice was steady but full of fire. If the law won't protect them, we will. The room went silent. Bear leaned forward. You serious? Red met his eyes. You saw that house. You saw what he did. I'm not letting him near them again. They started planning. Doc spread out a map of the county. He's back at his house near the ridge. His truck's registered there. Red nodded. We'll watch. If he goes near that family, we stop him. Tank frowned. You sure about this? We're not cops. Red looked up. Sometimes doing what's right means stepping into the mess no one else will. Doc added quietly. No violence, just eyes on him. Red agreed. No weapons, no noise, just heart. They rode out as the sun dipped behind the trees. The air felt heavy and still. Red led the way, headlights cutting through the fog. They stopped on a hill overlooking Raymond's house, the same crooked place they'd seen before. The porch sagged. The shutters hung loose. One light burned inside, and this time a truck sat in the driveway. He's home, Doc muttered. Through the window they saw him pacing, shouting into a phone. His voice carried faintly through the wind. Those kids were mine. You hear me? Mine, Tank muttered. Some people never learn. Red kept his eyes fixed on the house. We're not here to fight, just to make sure he stays away. They parked the bikes under the trees and waited. Hours crawled by. The man drank, stumbled, yelled. Then, sometime past midnight, he stormed out and climbed into his truck. Doc lifted the binoculars. He's leaving, Red straightened. Where to? Toward town, Doc said grimly. Toward them, Red's voice hardened. We ride. The engines roared to life, thunder rolling again. They followed from a distance, keeping their lights low. The truck swerved down the wet road, taillights glowing red through the rain. If he's headed where I think he is, Red said, we won't wait this time. Across town, Aisha sat awake, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't sleep. The stuffed rabbit lay beside her. Jamal snored softly in the next room. Their aunt dozed on the couch, exhausted. Then Aisha heard it, the low rumble of an engine. She peeked through the window and froze. Headlights were turning down their street. Her stomach dropped. No, she whispered, heart racing. Back on the highway, Red's voice came through the radio. Left on Cedar Street. He's headed straight for them. Tank gunned the engine. Not tonight. They spread out across the road like a wall. The rain came harder, pounding on metal and leather. When the truck rounded the bend, Red pulled in front of it, blocking the way. The man slammed on the brakes, horn blaring. Red stepped off his bike, water running down his jacket. Where you going, Raymond? The man stumbled out, eyes wild, breath heavy with whiskey. Out of my way, biker trash. You don't belong anywhere near those kids, Red said calmly. They're mine, he shouted. I raised them. Red's stare didn't waver. You hurt them. You lost that right. The man swung slow, sloppy, fueled by anger and liquor. Tank caught his arm, twisting it until he dropped to one knee. You're done for tonight, Tank said. The man spat in the mud. You think you scare me? Red stepped closer, voice low. No, but maybe it's time you scared yourself. When the sheriff's car arrived, red and blue lights cut through the rain. The sheriff stepped out, shaking his head. You boys again? Red shrugged. Looks like trouble's got a habit of finding us. The sheriff glanced at the drunk man kneeling in the mud. You made a mess. Maybe, Red said, but at least it's the right kind. The deputies cuffed Raymond without a fight this time. As they dragged him away, he shouted, This isn't over. Red turned his back. It is for tonight. By dawn, the rain had stopped. Jamal ran out to the porch when he heard the sound of bikes. "It's them!" he shouted. Aisha came to the doorway, smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. Red lifted a hand in a small wave as they passed. Bear looked over. "Think it's finally done?" Red nodded slowly. "It's done for them," Tank asked. "And for us?" Red gave a tired smile. "We'll rest when there's no one left to call for help." The road stretched ahead, golden under the rising sun, and as the roar of their engines faded, the world behind them seemed a little quieter, a little safer because someone cared enough to stop. That's how it always starts. Not with heroes, not with headlines, but with someone who simply stops when the rest of the world keeps driving by. And in that small town, word of what happened spread faster than anyone expected. At first it was just talk in the diner. A waitress told a truck driver who told a mechanic who told his wife. By sunset, half the town had heard about a gang of bikers who blocked a drunk man's truck and stopped him from reaching 2 children. Some called them vigilantes. Some called them angels. But no one dared call them wrong. Even the sheriff, once skeptical, was suddenly quiet around reporters. He said only one thing on camera. They acted where we should have. At the diner, the same one where Red had his coffee days before, the waitress Linda taped a handwritten note to the counter. It read, "If you see them, tell them thank you." It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. Everyone in town already knew who them meant. That night, as rain clouds gathered again over the hills, 6 engines rolled slowly down Main Street. The sound alone was enough to make people step outside their homes and porches, coffee cups forgotten in their hands. The Hells Angels had come back, not for attention, not for praise, but because unfinished stories have a way of calling people back. They weren't roaring through town like outlaws. They rode in quiet formation, headlights cutting soft lines through the mist, the kind of silence that carried more power than noise ever could. Inside the diner, Linda looked up from wiping the counter and froze. "They're here," she whispered. The bell above the door jingled as Red stepped in first, shaking off the rain. The rest followed, boots echoing against the tile floor. Every head turned. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then, an old man near the window stood up and started clapping. It wasn't loud, just steady, respectful. Then others joined in. Linda smiled through tears and poured fresh coffee. "On the house," she said. Red tried to wave it off, but she shook her head. "You stopped when no one else did. That counts for something." He smiled quietly. "We didn't do it alone. That boy had more courage than all of us combined." As they sat down, the bell rang again, and in walked Aisha and Jamal with their aunt. The room went still. Aisha wore a light blue jacket and held her brother's hand tightly. Jamal carried the same stuffed rabbit, now clean, and patched up with new stitching. When they saw Red, Jamal's face lit up. "You came back," he said, running to him. Red knelt to meet him halfway. "Told you we don't ride too far." The boy hugged him hard, the kind of hug that said more than words ever could. Aisha smiled shyly. "My aunt said we could come say thank you." Red stood and nodded. "You don't owe us anything, sweetheart. You did the hard part." Her aunt, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, approached slowly. "You men did more than you realize. The sheriff said the department's being reviewed after what happened." Doc raised an eyebrow. "You mean someone's finally paying attention?" She nodded. "Because of you." The air in the diner softened. People leaned closer, listening. Tank muttered, "Guess we made the news for the right reasons this time." Bear chuckled. "That's a first." Red looked around at the crowd. Folks who'd probably crossed the street to avoid them a week ago. Now they were offering smiles, nods, gratitude. He wasn't used to that. None of them were. Sometimes the world just needs to see a man do the right thing before it remembers how. Jamal climbed up on a bar stool beside Red, kicking his small legs. "Want to see what I made?" he asked. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. A drawing. 6 motorcycles under a bright rainbow, 2 kids standing nearby, smiling. At the top, written in uneven letters, "My angels on wheels." Red stared at it, throat tightening. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You're a good artist, kid. You got heart." Jamal grinned. "It's for you." Red shook his head softly. "You keep it to remember how brave you were." The boy hesitated, then smiled again. "Okay, but you'll visit, right?" Red smiled. "Count on it." As they finished their coffee, the rain outside turned into a steady drizzle. Linda leaned against the counter, watching the moment unfold like something out of an old movie. Quiet, honest, and rare. She whispered to another waitress. "You ever seen anything like that?" The younger woman shook her head. "Not in this town." When the crew stepped back outside, the air was cool and clean. The kind that only comes after a storm. People stood on the sidewalks, watching them. Some waved, some just nodded, but all of them felt the same thing. Respect, not the kind that comes from fear, the kind that comes from gratitude. Red zipped up his jacket and looked down the empty road. "Funny," he said quietly. "You spend half your life being called trouble. Then one night you do something right, and the world decides you ain't so bad after all." Tank smirked. "Guess miracles do happen," Bear added. "Or maybe people just needed a reminder of what decency looks like." Red smiled faintly. "Maybe." They started their bikes. Engines rumbled deep and steady, vibrating through the wet asphalt. The sound echoed down the street, not as noise, but as promise. Just before they left, Red turned back to see Jamal standing at the diner door, waving with his stuffed rabbit held high. Aisha stood beside him, smiling through the window. Red raised a hand in return, the rain falling softly between them. And in that brief moment, just a man on a bike and a boy with a rabbit. The world didn't feel divided anymore. It felt simple, right? Whole. As they rode out of town, headlights stretching like silver ribbons through the mist, people kept watching until the last engine disappeared beyond the curve. That sound, 6 engines fading into the distance, became something the town would talk about for years. They'd say, "Remember that night the bikers came back?" And someone would answer, "Yeah, I remember the night the bad guys turned out to be the good ones." Back at the diner, Linda looked at the drawing Jamal had left behind. She taped it to the wall above the counter right beside the note that said, "If you see them, tell them thank you." Underneath, she wrote 3 words. They did stop. And somewhere on the road beyond the hills, the 6 bikers rode through the night. No music, no noise, no glory, just rain, engines, and the quiet pride of knowing they'd made a small corner of the world a little brighter. Red didn't look back, not because he didn't care, but because he finally believed something he hadn't in a long time, that maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't as lost as he thought. But the world has a way of testing hope the moment it starts to grow. 2 weeks later, that test came printed in black and white. Red was in the garage wiping grease from his hands when Tank walked in holding the morning paper. "You're going to love this," he said flatly. Red raised an eyebrow. "What now?" Tank tossed it onto the workbench. "They're calling us criminals." The headline hit hard. "Local businessman claims assault by biker gang." Red read it slowly, jaw tightening. He's twisting the story. Doc came in holding 2 coffees. He's got lawyers and money. The media loves a man who can afford airtime, Bear muttered. "So, he hurts kids, gets caught, and somehow we're the bad guys." Red folded the paper carefully. He's trying to rewrite the truth. Let's make sure he doesn't. That afternoon, they met at the diner. The rain outside was light, the kind that whispered instead of roared. Linda poured their coffee and sighed. People are talking again. Some say you went too far. Red nodded. They weren't there. They didn't hear that boy scream. She leaned closer. The man's giving interviews on TV, acting like he's the victim. Bear sat down his cup hard. Maybe it's time we remind him what a real victim looks like. Red's voice stayed calm, but firm. We'll remind him of the truth. Not with fists, but with facts. They found him 2 days later at a car wash on the edge of town, posing for cameras beside his truck. His voice was smooth, practiced like someone rehearsing a lie. "These bikers," he told the reporter, "broke into my home and attacked me in front of my family." Then came a sound that cut his words short. 6 engines rolling in like thunder. The camera turned, Red dismounted, rain dripping off his jacket. "You forgot to mention what you did to those kids," he said, voice even. Raymond froze. "You don't scare me. You should be scared of yourself," Red said. The reporter hesitated, mic shaking slightly. "Are you denying his story?" "I'm saying," Red replied, "if we hadn't shown up that night, 2 children might not be alive to tell theirs." The man's face flushed. "You think people will believe you? You're just outlaws." Red smiled faintly. "Funny. Outlaws seem to be doing the law's job lately." Just then, a black car pulled up. A woman in a gray suit stepped out. The lawyer. "Mr. Cole," she snapped, "we're done here." She turned to Red. "If you keep harassing my client, you'll regret it." Red tilted his head. "Lady, you can sue me for caring, but I'll still sleep just fine." She huffed, shoved Raymond into the car, and they drove off. The reporter, still recording, turned back to Red. "Do you have a final comment?" He nodded. "Yeah, we didn't break into a house. We broke a cycle. Big difference." Then he put his helmet on and rode away. By the next morning, that line was everywhere. We didn't break into a house. We broke a cycle. People shared it online, printed it, quoted it on talk shows. Some called it rebellion. Others called it redemption. But to the ones who'd lived through something like Aisha and Jamal, it felt like truth finally had a voice. Letters started showing up at the diner from mothers, from veterans, from strangers. Some thanked them, some just said, "Because of you, I called for help." Linda kept them all in a box under the counter. In that small house across town, Aisha and Jamal watched the clip on their aunt's laptop. Jamal grinned. "That's him. That's Red." Aisha smiled. "He stood up for us." Their aunt nodded through tears. "He stood up for more than that. He reminded people what courage sounds like." Jamal hugged his rabbit. "They said he's a hero." His aunt smiled. "He's human, and sometimes that's even harder." That evening, Red stood outside the clubhouse, watching the sunset fade behind the trees. Tank joined him with a cigarette dangling from his lips. "Guess we're famous again," Tank said. Red chuckled softly. "Not sure famous is the right word. Better than infamous," Tank said with a grin. Red looked out at the road. "We didn't do it for cameras. We did it because it needed doing." Tank nodded. "And now everyone's watching." Red shrugged. "Then maybe they'll learn something." A sheriff's car pulled up. The same sheriff stepped out, hat low. He looked at them for a moment before saying, "District Attorney's reopening his old cases. Looks like people aren't scared of him anymore." Red nodded. "Good. Took long enough." The sheriff cracked a tired smile. "You made my job harder, but you made it matter again." Bear stepped outside just then, hands in his pockets. "That's the nicest thing a cop's ever said to me." They all laughed quietly. Later that night, Red walked down to the creek behind the barn. Moonlight touched the water. He picked up a stone and threw it, watching the ripples spread. One small ripple became another, then another, until the whole surface shimmered. He thought of that boy, soaked, shaking, but brave enough to speak. And for the first time in years, Red realized something simple. Real strength isn't how loud you are, it's how far your truth travels. Back in town, a woman stopped by the diner and looked at Jamal's drawing on the wall. She asked softly, "Who drew that?" Linda smiled. "A boy who finally got to sleep without fear." The woman stared for a long time, eyes glistening. "I used to live near that house. I heard yelling all the time and never called." Linda nodded gently. "Then call next time," the woman whispered. "I will." That night, far down the highway, 6 motorcycles rode under the stars, the sound deep and steady, not wild or angry, but peaceful. They didn't ride for revenge or for praise. They rode because somewhere out there, another small voice might be calling for help. And as the engines rolled like distant thunder across the quiet land, Red smiled to himself and whispered, "Let it echo." And it did, louder than anyone expected. The story that began on a rainy back road now traveled far beyond that small Mississippi town. First, it hit the local news, then the regional channels, then the internet, where people everywhere shared it. A boy's plea, a sister's courage, and a group of bikers who stopped when nobody else would. But the real shock came later, when the truth started crawling out from the shadows. A few mornings later, Doc showed up at the clubhouse carrying a brown envelope. He looked uneasy. "This came through the sheriff's office," he said, handing it to Red. "Addressed to us." Inside was a note and a flash drive. The note read, "I used to work for him. What you did gave me courage. Play the video." Red plugged it into an old laptop. The screen flickered, showing shaky footage. Raymond, red-faced, yelling behind a desk. Another voice, female, trembling. "You said those inspections were finished. I paid for them to be finished," he shouted, slamming his hand down. "You want to keep your job? Keep quiet." The video cut out. No one spoke. Tank let out a slow breath. "So he's been paying people off for years." Bear nodded. "And blaming everyone else when it falls apart." Red leaned back. "Then it's time the world sees the real man behind that suit. They brought the video to the sheriff." He watched twice, jaw tightening. "This is big," he said. "He's connected to county contracts, roads, buildings, all of it. We can open a full case." Red crossed his arms. "Do it fast. He's fooled this town long enough." Within a week, 2 more former employees came forward. One said she'd been fired for refusing to falsify reports. Another had proof of bribes. The man who once hid behind money now had nowhere to run. Meanwhile, Aisha and Jamal were building a new kind of life, the kind that didn't hurt. Their aunt's small home was simple but full of light. Pancakes on the stove, sunlight through the curtains, fresh flowers on the table. Jamal rode his bike down the quiet street, waving at every neighbor. Aisha sat on the porch sketching motorcycles, a faint smile on her face. When her aunt asked why she always drew them, Aisha said softly, "Because they remind me of the night everything changed." Her aunt smiled. "Then you keep drawing, sweetheart." One evening, the phone rang at the garage. It was the sheriff again. "You'll want to see this," he said. On TV, the anchor's voice was calm and sharp. Local businessman Raymond Cole arrested on new charges of fraud and witness intimidation. His mugshot appeared, the arrogance gone, replaced by something hollow. Tank walked in halfway through the report. "You watching?" Red nodded. "Yeah, took long enough." Tank grinned faintly. Guess the truth finally roared louder than the lies. The next day they rode into town. For once, people waved instead of crossing the street. Even the sheriff tipped his hat. At the diner, Linda met them at the door with the newspaper in hand. "Looks like justice found its way," she said. The headline read, "Children's Rescue Leads to Corruption Arrest." Red smiled softly. Guess good still travels. Inside, Aisha and Jamal were in their usual booth. When Jamal spotted Red, he jumped up, nearly knocking over his cocoa. "They locked him up again," he said, eyes shining. Red knelt. "I saw." "You did good, kid," Aisha asked quietly. "Is it really over now?" Red smiled. "It's better. And that's enough." Her aunt nodded in agreement. "That's more than enough." That night they rode out to the fields just beyond town. The air was warm and full of crickets. Bear looked over the horizon. "Crazy how it started, huh? Just one scared kid in the rain." Red nodded, and ended with a man finally facing the truth, Doc added. "Guess courage catches on." "Yeah," Red said softly, "like thunder after lightning." Back at the garage, Red pulled a small pink bracelet from his jacket pocket. Aisha's. He turned it in his rough hands, thinking about that first night. The rain, the fear, the moment that little boy's voice changed everything. "You saved her, Jamal," he whispered to himself. The next morning he found an envelope in the mailbox. No name, no return address. Inside was a photo. Aisha, Jamal, and their aunt standing in front of a freshly painted white house. On the porch hung a small wooden sign that said, "Home." On the back, written neatly, "We're okay now." Red stared at it for a long moment, then slipped it into his jacket. Tank saw it. "From the kids?" Red nodded. "Yeah." Tank smiled. "Looks like you finally fixed something that'll last." That evening, they sat around the fire pit behind the barn, the orange glow flickering across their jackets. Bear asked, "So, what now?" Red looked up at the stars. "Now we ride." Tank chuckled. "You ever stop?" Red smiled. "When there's nothing left to fix." The fire crackled softly. They didn't need applause or thanks. The real reward was knowing two kids could finally sleep without fear. And that maybe, just maybe, they'd help the world remember what decency still looks like. And as the night settled in, the wind carried the faint sound of engines in the distance. Not angry, not wild, but steady, like the sound of truth finally finding its way home. And once truth finds its way home, it doesn't knock, it walks right in. In the days that followed, everything in that small town began to shift. For years, people had whispered and pretended not to see. But now they couldn't unsee it. The newspaper that once avoided bad headlines about important men now printed one in bold. Corruption uncovered. Local heroes spark state investigation. The same sheriff's office that ignored Jamal's call was now flooded with reporters and officials asking hard questions. A few deputies quit. Others stayed to clean house. It felt like a storm had rolled through, washing away what was false and leaving only truth standing. At the diner, Linda kept the radio tuned to the news. Every hour, more people walked in. Teachers, farmers, retirees, all listening. The announcer said clearly, "Raymond Cole has been charged with 6 counts of fraud, bribery, and child endangerment. More charges are expected." A quiet cheer filled the room. Linda smiled and said, "Guess the angels on wheels did more than ride." The old man in the corner nodded. They reminded us what courage looks like. That afternoon, Red and the crew rolled into the diner for coffee. It had become their unofficial meeting spot, a place that now smelled more like belonging than trouble. Linda handed them fresh mugs. "You boys made history," she said. Red smiled. "We just listened," Tank added. "Not many people do." Bear scanned the paper. Says here the mayor ordered an internal review of the whole department. Doc chuckled. 20 years late, but we'll take it. Linda nodded. Sometimes truth takes the long road. Across town, Jamal and Aisha's aunt stood on her porch as a woman from Child Protective Services arrived with a clipboard. Just a follow-up, the woman said kindly. We like to check in after a big case. Jamal peeked from behind the door holding his stuffed rabbit. The woman knelt. You doing okay, buddy? He nodded. We got pancakes today. She smiled. Sounds like you're doing just fine. Before leaving, she turned to the aunt. You'd be surprised how many people come forward after hearing stories like yours. What those bikers did while it's bigger than they know. The aunt smiled. Maybe that's how change works. By week's end, the headlines turned from crime to community. People started fixing fences, painting schools, volunteering again. Bikers from nearby towns showed up to help Red's crew bringing groceries, supplies, and open hands. Never thought I'd see the day, Tank said, watching. Folks thanking us instead of hiding their wallets. Red grinned. Guess we're rewriting what a biker looks like. Bear added, about time someone did. The sheriff stopped by later, standing in the diner doorway with a new kind of pride. He took off his hat. The state froze all his accounts. Trial set for next month. His whole operation's going down. Doc raised a brow. All of it? The sheriff nodded. Every piece. He built his house on lies and it finally fell. Linda smiled. Then maybe this town can start breathing again. Red nodded. Sometimes one storm clears the air for good. That night the crew gathered at the clubhouse. Rain tapped softly on the tin roof, a rhythm that felt more peaceful than before. Tank poured coffee instead of whiskey, and Bear laughed. Guess we really are changing? Doc looked at Red. You think those kids will ever forget? Red shook his head. No, but maybe now when they remember. It won't hurt. They sat quietly, listening to the rain. The sound of healing, steady and calm. A week later, the story hit national TV. A group of bikers helped expose corruption after rescuing 2 children. The anchor said, their actions have inspired communities nationwide. Linda watched from the diner, wiping her eyes. They'll never take credit, she said, but the world just saw what good men look like. A truck driver at the counter smiled. Not angels with wings, angels with engines. Everyone laughed softly. That same night, the sheriff faced reporters outside the courthouse. Cameras flashed as he said, they didn't follow orders. They followed their hearts, and they did what needed to be done. That's all that matters. He tipped his hat and walked away. Back at the garage, Red turned off the TV halfway through the report. Tank asked, you ever going to tell folks it was us? Red shook his head. We don't need to. The point was never to be seen. It was to make things right. Bear smiled. Still feels good to be called the good guys for once. Red looked out the window. Guess the world finally figured out rough hands can still do gentle work. That night, Jamal's aunt sat at her kitchen table writing thank you cards. One went to the sheriff, one to Linda, and one to the men who stopped. Inside, she wrote, because of you, 2 children got their childhood back. Because of you, this town found its soul. She sealed it, placed it in the mailbox, and whispered, thank you. Out on the highway, 6 engines rolled through the night, not chasing trouble, not running from it, just moving forward. Their lights cut through the fog like quiet promises. And for once, the world didn't look away. It listened, because truth, once it starts moving, never stops. Months passed and life slowly began to look like life again. The storms gave way to sunlight, and that little town, the one that had once looked away from pain, now looked after its own. The diner walls were repainted. The playground near the school got new swings, and even the sheriff's office seemed a little warmer. The people had changed. You could see it in how they greeted each other now. A little slower, a little kinder, and somewhere at the edge of town, the sound of motorcycles still rolled through from time to time. Not to bring fear, but to remind everyone that good doesn't always come wearing a badge or a suit. Sometimes it comes wearing leather and carrying a heart too heavy to ignore. One of those afternoons, Linda was cleaning the diner counter when she heard the familiar rumble. She turned toward the window and smiled before she even saw them. "They're back," she said quietly. Moments later, 6 Harleys pulled up in a neat line. Rain had fallen earlier, leaving the road slick and shining, and the reflection of their headlights danced across the wet pavement like fire. Red stepped inside first, shaking off his jacket. "Afternoon, Linda," he said. "Afternoon, hero," she replied with a grin. He smirked. "Don't start that again." She laughed and poured him a cup of coffee. "I'll stop when you stop pretending you didn't change this whole town." Red sat at the counter, the smell of bacon and coffee wrapping around him like an old memory. "We didn't change it," he said. "It was ready to change. It just needed a reason." A few minutes later, the diner door opened again. Aisha and Jamal walked in with their aunt, both smiling wide. Jamal's hair was longer now, sun-bleached from afternoons playing outside. Aisha carried her sketchbook under her arm, still covered in small drawings of motorcycles and open roads. "Look who's here," Linda said, motioning toward Red. Jamal's face lit up. "I told you they'd come back." Red turned on his stool, smiling. "Hey there, partner." Jamal ran over and hugged him like no time had passed. "We moved. We live by the school now." "That right?" Red asked. "Closer to the playground." Jamal nodded proudly. "And we got a dog. His name's Buddy." Red chuckled. "Good name. You take good care of him, you hear?" Aisha approached slowly, her sketchbook pressed to her chest. "I made something for you." She opened the book to a page filled with color. It showed 6 bikers riding through a golden sunset, a small house glowing in the background, and above it all, in big, careful letters, she had written, "My angels came back." Red stared at it, eyes soft. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." Aisha smiled shyly. "You made us feel safe again. I wanted to draw that." He touched the edge of the page, voice quiet. "You did more than draw it. You reminded us why we ride." Linda wiped her eyes from behind the counter, pretending to be busy with a napkin. "I'm not crying," she muttered. Tank laughed. "Sure you ain't." Aisha giggled. Jamal sat beside Red and started asking questions faster than anyone could answer. "Where do you go when you ride? Do you get scared? Do you ever miss home?" Red thought for a moment. "We go wherever someone needs us. Sometimes we're scared, and yeah, we miss home. But home isn't always a place, kid. Sometimes it's people." Jamal nodded seriously, like he understood every word. "Then you can come to our house. You'd like it there." Red smiled. "I bet I would." After lunch, the crew stepped outside. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled of wet grass and diesel. The sun broke through the clouds just enough to paint everything gold. Bear stretched his arms. "Feels like a good day to ride?" Tank nodded. "Feels like a good day to be." Red looked at the horizon, where the road disappeared into a soft haze. Every day is a good day to make something right. Aisha and Jamal stood on the diner steps, waving. "Where you going this time?" Jamal called. "Wherever the road needs us," Red replied. Aisha cupped her hands around her mouth. "Promise you'll come back." Red gave a small nod. "You'll see us again. People like us don't stay gone too long." As the engines roared to life, Linda stood in the doorway, watching them go, the same way she had that first night when everything was still uncertain. But this time there was no fear, no pain, just peace. She looked at Aisha and Jamal beside her and said softly, "The world's better because they stopped that night." Aisha smiled. "The world's better because they stayed." Weeks passed, and summer turned to fall. The trial came and went, and the verdict was clear. Guilty on all counts. The man who once thought money could hide his sins would now live behind bars for a long, long time. When the news broke, the town didn't cheer or celebrate. They just nodded, quietly relieved, like closing the last page of a book that had taken too long to finish. One Saturday morning, the sheriff came by the diner with 2 plaques wrapped in brown paper. "These are for them," he said, handing them to Linda, "for their clubhouse." She unwrapped them carefully. The first one read, "For courage in the face of silence." The second simply said, "Because they stopped." Linda smiled, tears in her eyes. "They'll like these." The sheriff nodded. They earned them. That evening, Red hung the plaques on the wall of the clubhouse, one above the door, one by the window. Tank stood behind him, hands in his pockets. "Never thought we'd see our names on something like that." Red smiled faintly. "We didn't. The words don't say who we are. They say what we did, and that's enough." Bear raised his coffee mug. "To what we did then?" Doc lifted his too. "And to what we'll do next." The sound of mugs clinking echoed softly through the barn, carried out into the warm evening air. As night fell, Red stepped outside. The sky was dark but calm, stars glimmering over the open fields. He could still hear the laughter coming from inside. Rough voices softened by peace. He pulled the photo from his pocket again, the one of Aisha and Jamal in front of their white house. A small smile crossed his face. "Yeah," he whispered. "You're home now." He tucked the photo back into his jacket and looked down the road, stretching far into the distance. The engines behind him started one by one, low and steady. He swung his leg over the bike, started it up, and said quietly, "All right, boys, let's ride." As they rolled out into the night, the red glow of their taillights disappeared into the horizon. 6 small lights carrying a promise the whole town could feel, but never quite explain. And though they never said it out loud, everyone knew. Those men hadn't just saved 2 kids. They'd saved a little bit of everyone. And sometimes that's what true redemption looks like. Not loud, not shining, not written in headlines, but quietly echoing through the lives it touched. Weeks turned into months, and the story that once filled the news faded into memory. But in that town, no one truly forgot. They didn't have to because reminders were everywhere. At the diner, above the counter hung Jamal's drawing. 6 motorcycles under a rainbow, 2 kids waving in the background. The paper had yellowed a little at the corners, but Linda refused to take it down. She said it kept the place honest. Every now and then, travelers passing through would stop to read the small note beside it, handwritten in blue ink. They stopped when nobody else did, and that was all people needed to know. Down by the creek near the old clubhouse, the sound of engines still came and went like seasons. Sometimes 2 bikes, sometimes 10. They never announced where they were going, and nobody asked. Folks just knew that whenever those headlights cut through the fog, someone somewhere was about to be helped or defended or seen. They became more than men in leather. They became something different, a reminder that you don't need permission to do what's right. One cold morning in early winter, Red stood outside the garage tightening a bolt on his Harley. The air was sharp, the kind that bites a man's fingers but clears his mind. Tank walked out holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Feels like snow," he said. Red nodded. "World's quiet today." "Too quiet," Tank said with a grin. "Almost peaceful." They stood there a moment, just listening to the wind. Then Tank said softly, "You ever think about that night?" "Every day," Red replied. Tank smirked. "You ever regret stopping?" Red's answer came without hesitation. "Not once." Tank raised his mug. "Here's to never driving past what needs fixing." Red clinked his cup against his. "I'll drink to that." Later that afternoon, a letter arrived, this time from out of state. It came in a pale blue envelope. No return address. Inside was a short note written in neat handwriting. "You don't know me, but I heard about what you did. I used to be one of those kids who prayed for someone to stop. Nobody did back then, but you did now. And it gives people like me hope again." Red read it twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket right next to the photo of Aisha and Jamal. He didn't say anything about it to the crew. He didn't need to. Some things speak louder in silence. As winter deepened, the world around them slowed. Snow fell over the town like forgiveness, quiet and steady. Linda would sometimes look out from the diner and see their tire tracks fading down the road, then whisper to herself, "They're graduate out there somewhere doing what they do best." Aisha and Jamal would still draw pictures of motorcycles, now with wings, sometimes or halos that shimmered above their helmets. Their aunt kept every one of them taped to the refrigerator, a gallery of gratitude that never stopped growing. One Sunday, months later, the town held a small gathering at the park, a community barbecue to celebrate new beginnings. There was laughter, the smell of grilled corn, kids playing tag, and parked near the trees, half hidden behind the crowd, were 6 bikes. Their owners didn't join the speeches or the spotlight. They stood back, just watching. When the sheriff saw them, he gave a small nod. "You coming over?" he called. Red shook his head. "Just came to make sure everything's okay." The sheriff smiled. "It is thanks to you." Red looked around at the families, the children running barefoot through the grass, and said quietly, "Thanks to them." Then he and his crew turned and walked back to their bikes, helmets glinting in the sunlight. As they rode out of town again, Linda stepped onto the diner's porch, wiping her hands on her apron. She watched them disappear beyond the hill and whispered, "They always leave the same way they come," with peace behind them. The old man who sat at the counter most mornings said softly, "That's how angels travel. You only notice them once they're gone." That night, Red parked his Harley on a ridge overlooking the town. The lights below flickered softly, a quiet place that once knew pain, but now carried peace. The wind brushed past, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. He thought about all the roads behind them, the hard miles, the people they'd helped, the mistakes they'd made, and the kids who had reminded them what purpose felt like. Tank pulled up beside him. "You thinking again?" "Always," Red said with a faint smile. Tank nodded toward the town. "You think they'll remember?" Red's answer came slow. Not the names, but maybe the lesson. They sat there for a while, engines cooling in the night air. Then Red said quietly, "You know what I've learned?" Tank raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "That the world isn't divided between good and bad. It's divided between those who stop and those who keep driving." Tank looked out at the horizon. "Yeah," he said softly, "and stopping makes all the difference." A few days later, another rain rolled in. Heavy, relentless, the kind that makes the world feel small and holy again. At the edge of town, a woman's car broke down on the highway. She sat behind the wheel, nervous, glancing in the rear-view mirror as thunder cracked overhead. Then came the sound of engines, deep, steady, and familiar. 6 motorcycles appeared through the curtain of rain. The woman's eyes widened. For a moment, fear crossed her face. The kind the world teaches people to feel when they see leather jackets and loud pipes. But then one of the men pulled over, killed his engine, and walked up with a quiet smile. "Need a hand, ma'am?" he asked kindly. She hesitated, then nodded. "I think my tire's gone." He knelt beside the car and started changing it. Another biker held an umbrella over her so she wouldn't get wet. When the job was done, the woman said softly, "Thank you. I didn't think anyone would stop." Red smiled and said, "That's how most stories start." Oh. Then he tipped his head, got back on his bike, and rode off into the rain. Later that evening, the woman told her husband about the strangers who stopped. She pointed to the sticker on her car window, a small one she'd gotten from the diner when she passed through town a year ago. It read, "If you see them, tell them thank you." Her husband smiled. "Guess I just heard the echo." And so the sound continued, the low, steady thunder of kindness on the road, rolling across states, towns, and hearts. No headlines, no fanfare, just the quiet reminder that somewhere out there, people still stop. People still care. And the world, for all its noise and pain, still has hope, carried not by saints or superheroes, but by ordinary men who once chose to answer a child's cry.